What's up, gentlemen? This is Rising Phoenix Podcast, the podcast about how to rise up after your divorce. I'm your host, Michael Rhodes. Let's get into it. Joining me today is Dr. Mark Mayfield. Dr. Mark, let's just jump right into it. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have my own mental health story, and I think we might get into that a little bit. But part of the reason I do what I do is because of what I've come out of and what I still kind of wrestle with, right? So, a 12-year-old was attempted suicide due to being abused and bullied at school, struggled with depression and anxiety. I don't lead with the fact that I struggle with depression and anxiety much, but I know that it's still a part of my story, and there's key markers I have to pay attention to throughout my life, and it comes and creeps back in sometimes. More so recently, obviously, with everything that's been going on in our world and my life. But started out as being thought I wanted to do youth ministry, so I loved working with kids and helping them kind of find their path, and did that for a couple of years. Realized after a kid that attempted suicide, another one, or completed suicide, another one that attempted through a drug overdose, I didn't know what I was doing. And so my wife and I decided to go back to school, got my master's in counseling, and then went on to get my PhD in counseling. And I've been working with teenagers in the juvenile justice system, gang members in inner city, did equine therapy with vets.
Oh, cool.
Worked in clinics, and then about 7 years ago founded my own clinic in Colorado here, and have been seeing, we do about 20,000 appointments a year.
Oh, wow.
Through 30 staff members, and we're a nonprofit, so we don't want money to be an issue for people's mental health, and so we do our best to raise money around scholarship funds and client assistant fund type stuff, and grants and whatnot, but just have a real heart to normalize, talk about, demystify, destigmify mental health, because it shouldn't be this big scary thing. It should be something that we talk about. So I've written a couple books. The Path Out of Loneliness is my most recent one that came out about 30 days ago. And then I've also written a book on suicide and self-injury for parents and how to walk their kids through those scary times.
Wow. So how I found you is your newest book, which man, you talk about a higher power. I don't have faith, but sometimes I wonder, why don't I have faith again? Because I searched for books on loneliness and yours popped up, and how do I discount such a thing? But anyway, that's how I found you. And as you know, we had a discussion for the pre-interview. Loneliness is a huge thing for everybody, I think, especially I think for men. And I do want to pick your brain a little bit about what you see in the people that you deal with. It's sort of a side to this, but we'll come back to that later. I want to focus on loneliness for now. How do you define loneliness? Like, how does someone know if that's what they're going through, if that's what they're feeling?
Yeah, I think everybody's definition is going to be born out of their experience. I think, I think so. There might be a bunch of different definitions of personal loneliness, but I've kind of created my own just for conversation starters,
Sure.
And so as you listen, as your listeners listen, it might not fit with you precisely, but there might be pieces of it that you're like, okay, yeah, I can totally relate to that. But I think language creates culture, it starts conversation. I think it's really important. So I define loneliness as the state of being unseen or unnoticed, relationally, mentally, emotionally, physically, or spiritually. It could be driven by a lack of purpose or meaning, relationship and or identity. And I think the key is it's marked by a deep sense of hopelessness.
Yeah, that's one of the more difficult spots, I think, sense of hopelessness.
Mhm.
So let's talk a little bit about then what it is sort of for me,
Mhm.
and what, because I have that feeling. I don't know that it's hopelessness, although there's probably times where there is that. But I think for me, it's just that it feels like a void. Feels
Mhm.
like there's especially because I think, again, we're talking about guys going through divorce, and I'm going through it myself, and there was a time when I could turn to my left or right, depending how the living
Mhm.
room was set up, and there was my wife, and I could be like, man, what do you think of that thing on the show we're watching or whatever, like,
Mhm.
well, geez, the kid's struggling with this, what do you think of that? I don't have that. I have two cats, that one for each daughter, and they don't answer back. So for
Well, sometimes
me,
they might talk back, but they don't answer back, right?
the male cat talks a lot. It drives me nuts. But they, I can't have a real conversation with that. Well, I can, but I mean, it's more like a conversation with myself. But so that's to me it's this void. That's what it feels like. Like
Mhm.
I had something, now I don't. And I think guys that are going through divorce, I don't want to speak for all of them, but I deal with a lot of men, and I would guess that this is how they feel, that it's that void that is suddenly there. And so, talk about that and your take on that sort of view, that it's now
Mhm.
there's a void.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to expand on that just a little bit, 'cause
Sure.
I think the recognition of loneliness is when that void happens.
Mm.
But I wonder how many of I'm just gonna put this back on you and then your listeners. How many of you felt that way even before the
Ooh,
divorce, right? Because I think
sure.
we often can have this misnomer that loneliness cannot happen when we're in proximity to somebody else, or loneliness cannot happen if we're in relationship, quote unquote.
Right.
I think that actually it can, and I think a lot of times we don't realize maybe the depth of our loneliness until we're in this situation. I don't know, just throw that out there, but I wonder if that's true. I know it's been true for me in my own life when I thought, okay, before I got married, a girlfriend would fix that, or
Right.
before when I got married, my wife would fix that, and I realized, no, I can't put all my eggs in that basket. There's still, at least for me, I struggled and struggle with bouts of loneliness, even in relationship.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. And I think it doesn't come to the forefront always until that
Right.
particular event. But yeah, I would say there were times for sure. I'm sure in my marriage, but I definitely can remember in the previous relationship, I can definitely remember feeling lonely despite having a partner.
Hmm.
So I think you're onto something there. But so what is sort of like, how do you, what do I do to address it? Because even if, let's say, that is a fact, like I had loneliness before, and I don't think you're wrong there. What do I do? What do I do with that? How do I?
Well, I think, if you go into the definition that I talked about, it's a lack of identity and purpose at times, and I think that's going to be a shifting target, right? I mean, as we get older, as we morph, and as we experience life, the pain, the tension, everything, our identity and our purpose might shift slightly. But I think, I mean, I don't want this to sound too mystical, but I think a lot of what we need to look into is look into ourselves, answering the question, who am I, and what am I put on this earth to do? What is my purpose? And I think as we find meaning in that, I'm not saying that the loneliness is going to go away 100%, but it might fill some of that void that you've been talking that you mentioned of, okay, I've got a direction, I've got something that really brings meaning to my life, and people see me, right? And I think that's the big thing is are you being seen? And
Mm,
that can be done within relationship, that can be done within friendship, that could be done. I mean, I don't know if you've read books that throughout your life, but you
oh
have
yeah,
authors that, okay, that author sees me. Good grief, like you don't
yeah.
even know them, but you feel validated, you feel valued by the words that you're reading. I think that's a place to start. I don't know if it necessarily fixes it, right? And I don't know if we need to be fixed. I think there at
Mm.
times there's parts of this conversation going, what's the matter? What's wrong with sitting with some of that tension? Now it could be overwhelming at times, and that's not okay. When the hopelessness creeps in, that's not okay. Um, but I've found in my own life that when I'm sitting with that uncomfortability, it propels me forward.
So let's talk about, let's hone in a little bit. Okay.
Yeah,
'Cause you talked about sort of like finding a purpose, or knowing yourself. Um, how do you recommend that? Like, cause so I mean, for me, it just sort of, I couldn't even tell you necessarily. Obviously, the divorce preceded it, but what led to me sort of finding my purpose, which I think is this, I'm doing it right
sure.
now.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's expanding and growing, and that is helping divorced men is my thing now. But I couldn't tell you honestly what steps led to that. I don't remember. I just know
Hmm.
it came to be. But I don't think I don't know. So it could have been a step-by-step process. I don't remember that. I don't remember how it occurred. It just did. But how do you sort of tackle that question, who am I, what is my purpose?
Yeah, I think in a Western society as ours, we get drawn into who am I is what I do, my
Mm,
job, my career, especially for men, right?
yep.
Who are you? Well, I'm like, no. Like, I'm glad that you're a lawyer. I'm glad that you're a doctor. I'm glad that you're a counselor, a teacher, a mechanic. That's not what I'm asking. That's
Right.
like what you maybe find joy in from some of you.
Right.
But there's some people that are doing their thing because they're making a bunch of money and they have
Mm,
find no joy in that whatsoever.
true.
Um, I think the question of who am I is very elusive. One of the things that I really encourage people to do is find a book or a philosophy. So for example, one of the things that I really enjoy doing every year, I either read or listen to Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning.
Mm,
Now, Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist new psychiatrist at 24 years old that was brought into the concentration camps in Nazi Germany, and he survived. And his book, Man's Search for Meaning, was just a reflection on how he survived.
mm,
And he was talking about, he talks about this idea that he found meaning in and purpose in the suffering and the struggle. And basically, the premise of the book is that the Nazis could have done whatever they wanted to his body, but he actually was the one that protected his mind and preserved his mind. And he ended up dying an old man in the 1990s.
mm.
And so I go back to a book like that every year just to kind of recenter and reevaluate, and I learn something new every time. Now, those listening, it could be, you know, uh, you know, uh, you know, uh, Chandragupta, or if somebody's of faith from a Christian perspective, finding a book like that, wherever it kind of they align, either faith wise or just purpose in life wise. Find a book that kind of comes back and asks you the tough questions. But I think something you could do that without a book too, of just what brings me joy, what do I look forward to, what am I good at, who around me is somebody brings me joy, or is that reciprocal relationship. 'Cause I think a lot of times, I know for myself at least, I'm not going to project on anybody else, but I find my meaning in giving out and being somebody for somebody else. But that also needs to be reciprocated, because if not, I'm going to burn out, right? So there's that reciprocal piece too.
Sure.
But I think but then asking that question, being vulnerable, how am I doing? How is my heart? How is my mind? How is my spirit? How's my body?
Mm,
And reevaluating those things as well. I think that's where a lot of this conversation can come. It is very ethereal. It's very existential. I think that's on purpose, because that means the way I find it's going to be different than the way you find it. And that's okay.
sure.
Um, but we have to be willing to sit with some of these vulnerable questions. We have to
Yeah.
be willing to sit with, did my relationship really complete me, in that stupid movie term,
Right.
or did it add to what was already there? And I think we have to take a step back, going, okay, if I'm in the midst of a changing relationship, now I don't want to throw any judgment out there. Did I make the right decision in that relationship to begin with, or did I make it based on my insecurities, based on and is this helping me refine who I am? And hard question to ask, because you sit with that framework.
Yeah. So let's talk about those moments of uh sort of loneliness, hopelessness. Well, maybe not hopelessness. Let's put that one on hold. But those moments of
Sure.
feeling lonely, feeling you know, like there is a void. And so in those moments, it's perhaps best to start asking some of these questions, right? And so
Mhm.
what I'm trying to say, I guess, is this is about being mindful, right? About
Absolutely.
paying attention. Okay, man, I feel lonely. Let me shift. And
Mhm.
what are the things that I enjoy? Let me go do that, or at least let's make a list. Or it's about being active, right? It's about being active up here
Mhm.
with intent to discover who you are, to ask these questions, to figure out your purpose, right?
Mhm.
And so,
Absolutely.
yeah, I think for me, it's all about being mindful, about paying attention to where you're at, and instead of feeling lonely and then just ruminating and cycling, with that feeling and, oh, I'm a failure. I fucked up. The marriage it's all my fault.
Right.
All these sorts of things, right? So when you start having these thoughts, it's better to sort of redirect, right? That
Well, it is absolutely, because I think you didn't say it, but you said it, is that there's a difference between struggling with bouts of loneliness and then pervasive loneliness. And I think pervasive loneliness is where hopelessness creeps in. So we can come back to that later if you want.
Yep.
But like the what you're talking about is those bouts of loneliness that creep in, and then like you said, it's that doubt, it's that self-talk, it's that, I'm going to go down this deep dark hole, which could lead to the other stuff. And so you're right, it's being mindful of that. It's I like this idea of holding our thoughts captive, meaning like don't let your thoughts rule you, you rule your thoughts.
Yep.
And that's the mindfulness piece there too.
Yep.
I think one thing that I would just say as a word of warning, make sure that what you turn to doesn't numb the stuff, because I think we can turn to a substance, we could turn to sex, we could turn to pornography, we could turn to other things that numb how we're feeling. And I think it's sometimes okay, like let's just be honest, we want to be numbed for a while because we just need a break. Like I'm not going to judge that at all. But I think if that's our go-to, then we numb everything, the joy, the happiness, the everything. And I think sometimes the biggest teacher that we can have is sitting in that discomfort for a little while, asking these questions, and then making a plan forward. And again, it's not an end all be all fix all. I wish it was a 2 + 2 equals 4 formula, but it's not.
Yeah, and I wanted to comment on that and say sarcastically, like, what's can you just fix it for me? Like, isn't there like just do this thing and you'll be fine. Like your loneliness will disappear. I don't think there is anything worth getting to in life that doesn't have some difficulty attached to it, right?
Agreed.
And I think sometimes we look for those quick fixes, but they just don't exist. Like I think there's probably someone who's listening now going, okay, what do I need to do? Like, let me get this. Like, how do I fix this? What? And it's not. We can give you some tools and some ideas and some tips, but it's work, right? It's work.
Yeah. Well, I can't tell you how many times in my 13, 14 plus years of counseling where I've had people come in, hey doc, just fix me. I'm like, well, you're going to be really pissed at me here shortly because that's not going to happen. And I don't pull any punches in my counseling, and so I put it back on them to do the work. And if they're not going to do the work, then there's no point. And I think we have to get to that part of ourselves where like, what else do I do? Well, I think deep down in all of us, we're fighters. And so let's figure out a way to fight. And a lot of times that's fighting ourselves, fighting our misconceptions, our preconceptions, fighting our biases about others and ourselves. I mean, there's a lot there to it, and I love that that we need to work and move forward in that tension and that struggle.
Yeah, agreed. So let's talk. If you are in that hopeless headspace, what do we do then? Because at that point, you've probably ruminated so long that it's not a quick fix to start trying to change your thoughts. Like you're so deep in it. What do you recommend in those moments?
Well, I mean, there's a couple different paths you can take, right? Recent research showed that about, I think it's 18 to 22% of individuals that receive a mental health diagnosis turn to their clergy or a person of faith first before they go to a mental health professional. And so, if people are listening and they're Baha'i, Jewish, Hindu, Muslim, Christian, whatever they are, there are organizations that are set up to sit with you in those things. And I think that might be, if that's your bent, go find your clergy first. I think that's a great place to figure it out. But Dr. Irving Yalom is another hero of mine in just the counseling realm, and he always says, that we get to a place that is beyond ourselves. Sometimes it's okay to have a paid friend, and I think that's where counseling comes in. I think there's not this mystical, I'm going to go to a counselor and I'm going to get healed, or I'm going to get pigeonholed and labeled. No, like we're in a lot of ways, we're just a paid friend. And there's a lot of people in this world that don't have people that they trust, they can sit with and process their deepest, darkest feelings. And so finding a good counselor, and, I can give you some resources, towards the end of how to do that, but it's not a life sentence. I've got clients that I've had for 5 years, but they come every month now just because they feel like it's a great check-in. I've got clients that I've had that we were intensive 2 times a week for 6 months. Wow. And now they're great, and so it's the way we look at it. And I think a paid friend, and it's confidential. I think it's fantastic. We can say whatever we want, except for a couple things. in our sessions, and it doesn't leave the room, and there's something beautiful about that too.
Yeah. No, agreed. I think there is something incredibly important about counseling, and but I do say all the time that, and this isn't a affront to your industry,
No, no,
because I believe in it. But because you go to someone's office and they have a degree on their wall, doesn't mean that they're going to be the one for you. It's just like dating. In my view, you got to find
agreed.
the one that works for you. Just like there are bad everything's in life, there are
Yes.
bad counselors. I've had some.
Amen. I've had some.
Yeah, and so
Yes.
you have to be picky, I think, and find. I think first it starts with defining what do you want, what are you looking for, right?
Hmm.
Because again, I think some people go, oh, I'll just get into counseling, like you said, and oh, but just fix me, doc. Like, well, that's not how it works. Like, so where do you
Yeah.
want to get to define that and see if that person can help you get there? Um, the other thing that came up while you were talking, and I wanted to ask you about, I'm very curious. In all of your dealings with your clients, and I don't know your breakdown, maybe you do or don't, but in terms of the loneliness question, do you find that it's more men or women? And obviously this is anecdotal, but what do you find has been the more, where is loneliness landed more, men or women?
I think before COVID, I would have said men. I think now I would say it's probably pretty equally distributed. What I will say, and this is where it causes just some alarm for me, as I see it hugely growing amongst our teenage and child populations,
Mm,
which is sad and scary, I think, in some ways, but definitely with our teenagers. But I think across the board, probably men, because I think for one reason or another, whether we were raised by parents of past generations where we don't talk about our feelings, or there's something stigmatic around mental health, or whatever it is, we just don't have places to turn. And so I think, I do believe that men can relate to the feeling of loneliness probably easier or more quickly,
mm.
um, you know, because of our own preconceived notions or stigmas that we've placed.
Yeah, I agree. I see and deal with it all the time. I think for whatever reason, and there's so much to this question, but like that men just keep it inside. We don't, I asked, I had a group chat last night for my support group, and I said, how many of you here have cried in front of another man? And like, I don't think anyone raised their hand, and to me, I understand it, but boy, is that fucking sad.
It
Like,
is.
uh, who
Yeah.
who cares if you cry? Like, it's not our duty as men, in my view, to go through life white knuckling it and hoping for the best, or swallowing our emotions. It's detrimental. It leads to suicide, quite frankly, in my view.
Oh, it does. It totally does. And I think, we see that suicide is number two, I think, killer for 10 to 25-year-olds right now. But then it's, going up for, 40 to 60-year-olds, white males, as well. And so, um, yeah, you're right. I think it's we put ourselves in a box, and I think we associate emotions and tears to weakness, where I associate that to strength.
Amen. Amen. Again, and these things always. This is why I make an outline, because I tend to go off on rabbit holes, and I got another one. And I'm curious, as a you're a man of faith, correct?
Yep.
I am not, and that's not a judgment on me or you. I struggle with it. My best friend in the world is a very faithful man, and I love him to death. And I wouldn't change a thing about him. But I'm curious for you, how much did your faith help you out of your depression, or help you deal with your depression? How much do you credit your faith for
Mhm.
that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. I think it had a big, I mean, a right understanding, I think, of my faith helped immensely.
Mm,
Um, I think, but I had to come to a right understanding of that, and I think that was a big deal. But I think believing in having something bigger than myself, uh, and people could judge that all they want, but I think that really helped, my um, understanding of self in relation to the world. That helped me understand myself in relation to my depression. It didn't put a band-aid on it, and I think there's a lot of harm that can happen in places of faith where we just throw a band-aid on it,
yeah.
and that that didn't happen for me, and so I try really hard not to let that happen to others as well. Like if you only had more faith, or if you know,
Right.
prayed more, or that kind of BS, so it's like, so I think having a right understanding and the right understanding is that this life is is filled with joys and suffering, and we can't, I think, pick and choose, and we can't, um there's not quick fixes. We have
Yeah.
to sit with the joys, enjoy the joys. We have to sit with the tension and the suffering, and in a weird way, enjoy the suffering. Like my life over the last 20 months has been really hard. A lot of tragedies, a lot of death, a lot of sadness, and yet it has been probably more rich and more full than I think life was before that. And it's hard to explain.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think that was just kind of a quick answer to your question. But I think, yeah, I think a right understanding of my faith really did help me through, and helps me through depression.
Do you find yourself at all, and this isn't to challenge you, or I promise
Sure,
you to,
no.
I'm just curious, like, do you still have moments of, or do you have you ever had any kind of moments of doubt, or like, this is all bullshit, or maybe not
Mhm.
quite that,
Oh, no,
severe?
we'll go that strong. Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, even as recently as a year and a half ago, when my dad was in the ICU,
Mm.
on life support, and just kind of questioning everything. Um,
What do you do in those
but
moments? What do you do? What do you
I
do?
I look I to me personally, I look backwards at God's faithfulness and see how He has shown up in the past, even in the ways that I wouldn't have expected.
Mm.
And so I think a lot of times when I'm in the midst of things that don't make sense, I have to look backwards and kind of keep account of faithfulness. And I think it's just again, it's kind of that right understanding of who I am in this world, at least in my opinion. And even if my dad did pass away, would that have negated everything that I experienced in the past?
Mm.
I would wrestle with it,
Sure.
but I think the answer would have been no. Um, and so it is. It's not cut and dry. I think just like the loneliness conversation, it's not
Right.
cut and dry. I think I love that you're having conversations like this, because I think that's how we get to know each other better, how we understand humanity, how we understand faith, how we understand what we believe and why we believe, whatever that looks like. And instead of throwing stones at one faith or an organization or the other, it's great to have conversations. And I think this is so important.
Yeah, I don't, man. I'm not. I try not. Well, I judge because I'm human, right? We all
Well,
judge,
right, so do I. Right? Yep.
right?
Yep.
I mean, but I try to keep an open mind. Like I said, my best friend in the world is a very faithful man. I don't see the world the way that he sees it, but I don't think that means that I see it better, or he is wrong or I am right. Who the fuck knows, man?
Right.
Like I can't. It's easy to judge. It's easy to have notions that, because there's comfort in that, right? We all have these little
Mhm.
boxes and go, oh, you're a Christian, so you must be this, or you're an atheist, so you must be that, or you're a feminist, or whatever, Republican, Democrat, and I get the simplicity in that because life is fucking complicated, man.
Sure.
We're all dealing with a lot of shit, and so putting shit in boxes, I think, is easier, but I think it's lazy. And
Mhm.
generalizing is laziness, in my view. But I
Right.
understand it. I
Yeah.
understand it.
No, but I totally agree. I think that's where, somebody, I have students ask me if I teach, in the counseling program, what my theoretical orientation is. And I said, I'm an existential reality feminist. And they're looking at me like what? You know, but aren't you I'm like, yes, I can't, why can't I be both?
Right.
And, aren't you
Right.
this? Aren't you that? Yes.
Yeah.
you know? And so I
Yeah.
think you're right, to take away the boxes is really important. And I think it goes back to this conversation about loneliness and mental health. Taking away the boxes around those things is going, I can be happy and yet still struggle with depression.
Mm.
I can be lonely and still yet be in relationship. I can be in relationship, So I mean, I think it's a yes and more so than we'd like to say. And you're right. Black and white really brings comfort, or at least false hope, or a false sense of security.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I struggle with it. I have my views, that I don't touch on, personal views that I don't touch on, because I don't want anyone to not, let's say they're listening to the podcast and they're like, wow, this is really helpful. And then politics seeps its little way into, as it does with everything. And I say something and they're like, oh, well, fuck this guy. So I
Right.
understand the tendency. I think it's short-sighted, and it's an unfortunate byproduct of our culture, of our, of the news media, of our politicians, because it's a lot easier to get votes if you can demonize the other side.
Oh, absolutely.
And
Well,
may and
it's
go ahead.
funny because I got invited it'd be 2 years ago this December, to the White House to be a part of a mental health initiative.
Hmm.
And everybody's like, "You're not going to go, are you? Like, it's the Trump administration." And I'm like,
Right.
if I don't go and have a voice, like, who's going to do that? Like, again, like you said, the black and white, like,
Yeah.
let's throw stones and put people in the block. I'm like, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go and I'm gonna stir up the pot a little bit. I'm gonna go and ask questions. I'm gonna go and, but I think it's worse not to go,
No, agreed.
and not to have conversation. So I'm glad that you're doing this kind of stuff, and really, pushing some of these limits when it comes to some of these conversations, because I think it really helps us as a society, but also the guys that are listening, going, oh, okay, maybe I've oversimplified, or maybe I've overcomplicated, or maybe I've,
Right.
and I love it. I think it's great.
Well, and I think it cuts us off, right? We talk about loneliness. Like, if you're going to cut off half of the country, if you're lonely and you're like, oh, I'd like to join that group, but it's full of Republicans or it's full of Democrats or what, like, who know, like, you get into it, like, it could be a fucking birding group. I don't know. Maybe you're into birding, right? You go to the
Right.
birding group and the guy's like, yeah, fuck Biden. And you're like, ah, I'm out. You know what I mean?
Right.
Where the healthy thing to do is, I think, learn some boundaries and be like, hey guys, can we not talk about that? Which is also a difficult thing to do. But I think if
Yeah.
you're able to do those things, it lends itself to eliminating some loneliness. It opens you up to whatever may be and whatever may
Yeah.
come.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
I think it can be difficult, obviously, because we're locked in sort of our own sort of views and agendas and stuff like that. But I really think it sort of it cuts us off
Mhm.
from the potential to combat this loneliness. So let's recap a little bit. Let's talk about what the definition of loneliness is. Could you cover that one more time?
Yeah, absolutely. So I say that the state of loneliness is the state of being unseen or unnoticed relationally, mentally, emotionally, physically, or spiritually, and it can be driven by a lack of purpose or meaning, relationship, and our identity, and is marked by a deep sense of hopelessness.
Man, I think that's a fucking great definition. So let's talk about, okay, so what do we do, right? And
Hmm.
first, foremost, I guess, is trying to discover who we are. What do we like? What do we desire? What makes us happy? What brings us joy? Those are the kind of questions that we need to start asking ourselves, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think if you are a person of faith, to use that as a healthy guide, as well, I think is important. If you're not, that's okay. I think you still can answer these questions, but I still think all of us have a lens, a worldview, if you will, that guides us, governs us, and I think we need to reflect on that, but also use that as a guide for some of these questions as well.
Yeah, agreed. And then the other component is, if you are hopeless, if you are in a state of complete despair, get some help.
Yeah. Yep. Raise your hand. Could be a support group. Could be reaching out to you and asking, okay, who would you suggest I go to? Using psychologytoday.com is a great way to filter through your zip code and kind of what you're looking for. Um, yeah, I mean, I think it's, and it might not be counseling, it might be coaching, it might be
Yeah.
some spiritual guidance from somebody. I mean, whatever it looks like, but if you're hopeless, ask for help. Don't do it by yourself.
Yeah, agreed. And so the last question that I ask everyone, I think it's a pretty important one, because there are men that are listening that might be a week into their journey,
Mm,
a day even, where they don't know what to do with themselves.
mm,
I've been through it. I didn't eat.
sure.
I couldn't sleep. I was just a shell of a person. And so, what words of wisdom would you impart to that man who had just found
Hmm.
out, hey, I want a divorce. I'm moving out. You need to move out. What are some things you would say to that man?
Yeah, I think look at it from a stance of grieving. Don't look at the stages of grief. The stages of grief were designed for people that found out they were dying, and they were trying to figure out how to come to grips with their mortality. So don't look at, like, I've got to be at a certain stage of grief. Grief is messy, and so I think look at it from a stage of a standpoint of grief. And so one of my biggest encouragements for somebody that is grieving, right? So you lost relationships, like somebody died. I mean, let's just be honest, right?
Yep.
And you've got to continue moving forward. If you've got kids, if you've got a job, if you've got responsibilities, so look at ways to schedule your grief. And so I will encourage people in my office, like, okay, schedule 3 15-minute weeks or parts of your day where you go rage, where you go cry, where you go beat your pillow, or whatever that looks like, to let out the anger, let out the sadness. And then and when the alarm goes off at 15 minutes, put yourself back together and go to your responsibilities, because if we don't let that out, it's going to come out in different ways. It's a process, right? And so you might be doing well for a while, and then it comes and bites you in the ass, like, because you don't know what you don't know, and you're like, where did that come from? Well, it comes out of nowhere. There's times where I still am grieving the loss of my grandfather, and that was 12 years ago.
Yeah.
And there might be moments where it comes out of nowhere, and just allow that to happen. Time does not heal wounds. I think that's the biggest BS ever.
Agreed.
We grow around the wounds. We become stronger. We become different. We become more developed in different areas because of it. So don't look at time like, oh, if I get to 6 months after the divorce, it's going to be better. No, it might not be.
Right.
It's going to, but you're going to grow. You're going to learn new techniques and tools. So I think those are the two pieces of wisdom that I would give. And don't judge your journey. Don't compare it to somebody else, because it's going to be yours. It's unique.
Yeah, agreed. I think there's a component of there that I really love that you kind of talk about is this. And I can be healing, or even healed, dare I say, and still have grief around what happened. I don't think we can ever truly look back, and I'm only 2 years out, but I don't think I can ever truly look back and be like, oh man, glad that happened. There might be some good that comes of it. I can be healed and still grieve what occurred.
Yeah. The grieve the what ifs, the grieves the missed outs, and some people listening could be going, well, I'm relieved, and like, put and, don't put but, put and to everything, because I think helps expand your purview for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm gonna lean on that one more. I think it's such a healthy and realistic way to look at it. Because again, I think we put ourselves in these boxes. Like, I will be healed when 6 months goes by, or a year, or when I never look back in anger or sadness, or and I don't think that's the case. I think you can still have a good, healthy life and look back and regret or grief as time moves on. So
yeah, absolutely.
How can people find Dr. Mark Mayfield? What's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, I mean, you can find the book on Amazon. I would encourage people to pick it up and do it in groups, and read through it together. It's not meant to be taken as absolute truth. So read it, discuss it, disagree with it, pick it apart. And that's the beauty of, I think, the book. You could also find me at the Dr. Mayfield for Instagram and Facebook, and then drmayfield.com for my website. But I'd encourage people to reach out if they've got questions and want to continue the conversation. But I think that's the biggest piece right there. Continue the conversation, and add to it.
Amen. Well, thank you, sir. I really appreciate you doing this, and I look forward to doing it again.
Yeah, let me know. I'd love to. I love what you're doing, and I think this is such a great tool for men, and I know that a lot of individuals listening are being blessed because of it. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Thank you so much for watching and or listening. Thank you to Nick Coyle and Lifer for allowing me to use their song, Born Again, which you're hearing now and at the intro to the podcast. Thank you to Justin Dulahanty and all of my brothers at the Alpha Code. Please visit the website, risingphoenixpodcast.com, to connect with me and other like-minded men who are looking to thrive and grow after their divorce. And remember to surround yourself with people who add value to your life, who challenge you to be greater than you were yesterday, who sprinkle magic into your existence like you do to theirs. Life is not meant to be done alone. Find your tribe. Take care.